It was my own son who framed me and sent me to prison for a crime I never committed. He harmed my family and left me for dead. They thought this old man was broken, powerless, and forgotten, but they never imagined what was about to happen. With just one phone call, everything would change. Before I tell you how I reclaimed my life, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching this story from. I want to know who is listening to an old man's story of betrayal and revenge. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like mine. And if you believe in justice, hit that share button. This is my truth. My name is Arthur Sterling, but everyone in the city used to call me Artie. I was the founder of Vanguard Global, a company worth $70 million. I lived in a massive penthouse overlooking Central Park and a mansion in the Hamptons. But for the last 730 days, I was just inmate number A47239. The cell walls were damp and cold, smelling of old concrete, dried sweat, and rotting hope. For me, those gray walls had become a calendar. With the tip of my thumbnail, which was rough and chipped from hard labor, I traced the final vertical line near the leg of my iron cot. 729 days were behind me. Today was day 730. Today I would walk out of this hellhole and back into the New York air. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale air that tasted like rust and regret. The winter chill made the cell feel like an icebox, even with the thin blanket they gave us. I sat on the thin mattress that had been my bed for 2 years. Before this, I slept on Egyptian cotton sheets in a king-sized bed. Now my back ached every single morning from the metal springs. The memories of my downfall came like a flood. I remembered the courtroom and the cold gaze of the judge. But mostly I remembered my son, Pierce Sterling. He stood on the witness stand in a perfectly pressed suit with fake sorrow on his face. He told the judge he loved me, but could not justify my actions. He told the world that I had pushed his wife, Tiffany, down the stairs and killed their unborn child. I watched Tiffany sit in a wheelchair, clutching her stomach and crying crocodile tears. She told the jury that I screamed at her before I pushed her. It was all a lie. Every single word was a lie. I had gone to Pierce's office that day to confront him about $1.5 million missing from our company accounts. I never even touched Tiffany. She had thrown herself down those stairs the moment she saw me coming. The security cameras had mysteriously stopped working during those minutes, leaving only footage of me looking angry at the top of the stairs. When the judge found me guilty, my world collapsed. I saw Pierce embrace Tiffany, and I caught a look in his eyes. It was not grief. It was cold calculation. It was the look of a man who had just removed the only obstacle between him and a multi-million-dollar inheritance. Pierce moved fast. He froze my accounts and claimed I was mentally unstable. Without my money, I could not hire the high-priced lawyers who could have saved me. I was stuck with a public defender who barely knew my name. I lost everything: my company, my home, and my dignity. As I prepared to leave, my cellmate, an old fraudster named Carl, looked at me. He told me I looked too calm for a man walking out of prison. I told him that the real hell was not inside these walls, but out there waiting for me. I looked in the cracked mirror above the sink. The man staring back had hair streaked with gray and eyes as dark as coal. I had lost weight, but the rage inside me was burning like a furnace. I thought about my wife who died 3 years ago. I was glad she did not live to see what our son had become. Pierce and Tiffany were probably waiting outside right now, with reporters ready to play their roles for the cameras. But I had learned patience in this cell. Patience is a weapon, and revenge is a dish best served cold. I had kept mine on ice for 2 long years. The iron gates of the prison opened, and the morning sunlight hit me like liquid gold. It was a sharp brightness after 730 days of fluorescent gloom. The New York winter air was thick and smelled of freedom and gasoline. A crowd of reporters had gathered outside their cameras, clicking like hungry insects. And there they were. Right in the center, like actors on a stage, stood Pierce and Tiffany. Pierce wore a navy blue suit that probably cost $3,000, and his face was twisted into a look of fake regret. Tiffany clutched a bouquet of white roses and wore a cream-colored dress. They were the perfect picture of a grieving, forgiving family. Pierce called out to me, his voice loud enough for every microphone to catch. He told me welcome back, and said they were there for me because we were family. I did not slow down. I walked forward in my wrinkled shirt and faded jeans, the same clothes I had been arrested in 2 years ago. When Pierce stepped forward to give me the roses and told me to get in his car so we could talk, I walked right past him. I treated him like he was a piece of trash on the sidewalk. He grabbed my arm and hissed at me not to make a scene. I looked at his hand on my arm, then I looked him dead in the eyes. I told him to let go of me or I would scream that he was assaulting me in front of all the cameras. His hand dropped as if he had touched a hot stove. Tiffany started shouting that I was insane and that prison had destroyed my mind. But then the deep growl of a powerful engine silenced her. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided into the parking lot like a panther. The license plate was custom. It was the kind of car that commanded respect. A young man stepped out. He was in his early 30s, wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit and expensive glasses. This was Harrison Thorne, the lawyer who only took cases that were impossible to win. Pierce had tried to hire him a year ago, but Harrison had refused him without a word. Harrison walked directly to me, ignoring the reporters and Pierce's shocked face. He told me that everything was ready. He opened the rear door of the Rolls-Royce for me with a professional bow. I paused and looked back at my son and his wife. They stood there, frozen, the roses wilting in Tiffany's hands. Their carefully planned media show was falling apart. I did not smile or brag. I just let them see that the man who went into prison was not the man who was coming out. I slid into the soft leather seats. The interior smelled of luxury power and expensive wood. The door closed with a heavy sound like a bank vault locking. Outside, chaos broke out. Reporters swarmed Pierce, asking him how his father had the money for a car like this and who the lawyer was. Pierce's face turned from pale shock to bright red. He realized right then that his calculations were wrong. The game was not over. It was just beginning. Harrison looked at me through the rearview mirror and asked where we were going. I leaned back and closed my eyes, taking my first truly free breath in 2 years. I told him to take me to the sanctuary. I needed to wash the touch of those traitors off my skin. And then we would begin the war. The smell of floor wax and old wood in a Manhattan courtroom is something I will never forget. It is a smell that sticks to your skin and follows you into your nightmares. As I sat in the Ritz-Carlton penthouse looking out at the city lights, my mind drifted back to that cold Tuesday 2 years ago. I could still hear the heavy oak doors swinging shut, locking me inside a world of lies. I sat at the defense table, my hands shaking slightly. I kept looking back at the gallery, searching for a friendly face. But all I saw were strangers and reporters hungry for a scandal. And then there was Pierce, my only son. The boy I had taught to throw a baseball in Central Park. The man I had groomed to take over Vanguard Global. He was sitting in the front row, his face a mask of practiced grief. He would not even look at me. When the bailiff called his name, Pierce stood up and walked to the witness stand with a steady step. He wore a charcoal suit that I had bought for him on his 30th birthday. He looked like the perfect son, the kind of man any father would be proud of. But when he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth, I felt a chill run down my spine. The prosecutor asked him to describe what happened on the afternoon of September 25th. Pierce took a long, shaky breath. He looked at the jury with eyes that seemed to be brimming with tears. He told them he loved me. He told them I was a great man once. But then his voice cracked as he said he could no longer stay silent about my violent outbursts. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that I had never raised a hand to anyone in my life. But my lawyer squeezed my arm, telling me to stay silent. Pierce began to spin a web of lies that left me breathless. He told the court that I had become obsessed with power and money. He said I was jealous of his happy marriage and his growing influence in the company. Then came the biggest lie of all. He described the moment at the top of the office stairs. He said I was screaming about money, my face red with fury. He told the jury that when Tiffany tried to calm me down, I lunged at her. He looked the foreman of the jury in the eye and said, "My father pushed her. He watched her fall, and he didn't even move to help her. He killed my unborn child." The courtroom went silent. I could hear the heartbeat in my own ears. I looked at Tiffany, who was sitting in a wheelchair nearby. She was clutching her stomach, sobbing into a silk handkerchief. Those were crocodile tears, but the jury didn't know that. They didn't know that she was a woman who would do anything for a piece of my empire. The truth was so simple, yet no one wanted to hear it. I had gone to Pierce's office that day because our lead accountant had found a massive hole in the books. $1.5 million had been moved into a shell company called Lux Consulting. I knew Pierce was behind it. I went there to save him from himself, to give him a chance to put the money back before the board found out. When I confronted him, Tiffany was there. She didn't look scared. She looked cornered. She knew that if I went to the police, their life of luxury would be over. As I turned to leave, she didn't fall. She stepped toward the stairs and threw herself down. I reached out to catch her, but I was too far away. My hand was outstretched in the air, a gesture of help that Pierce's lawyers turned into a gesture of hate. The most calculated part of their plan was the security footage. In a building owned by Vanguard Global, a building I built, the cameras in that hallway had a technical glitch at the exact moment she fell. The only footage the police found was from a minute before, or showing me pointing a finger at Pierce and looking angry. It was the perfect frame job. When the jury came back with the guilty verdict, the sound of the gavel hitting the wood sounded like a gunshot. I looked at Pierce one last time before the guards took me away. He was leaning down to whisper something in Tiffany's ear. For a split second, he looked up and caught my gaze. There was no sadness in his eyes. There was no regret. There was only a cold, hard victory. Within 48 hours of my sentencing, Pierce had filed an emergency petition. He told a judge that the trauma of the trial had proven I was mentally unstable. He used my violent act as proof that I could no longer manage my own affairs. He froze every bank account I owned. He locked me out of the company I had spent 40 years building. I was left in a prison cell with nothing but the clothes on my back and the memories of a son who had sold my soul for a few $1 million. I spent many nights wondering where I went wrong. Did I give him too much? Did I love him too little? But as the months turned into years, the sadness turned into something else. It turned into a cold, hard stone in my chest. Watching my own blood testify against me was a pain worse than any physical wound. It was a betrayal that reached deep into my bones. He didn't just want my money. He wanted to destroy the very idea of who I was. He wanted the world to see me as a monster so he could play the hero. But Pierce forgot one thing. He forgot that I was the one who built Vanguard Global from a single desk in a rented garage. He forgot that you don't reach the top of the New York business world by being weak. He thought the gray walls of prison would break me. Instead, they became the forge where I sharpened my resolve. I stood up from the plush chair in the penthouse and walked to the window. The reflection of the old man in the glass looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my heart, but it was no longer in control. I had a list of names, and Pierce was at the very top. He had taken 2 years of my life, my reputation, and my peace. Now it was time for him to pay the bill. Harrison Thorne walked into the room, his laptop open. He told me the forensic audit was starting, and the first of the bank accounts had been flagged. I nodded. The first step of the war was in motion. Pierce was about to find out that the father he betrayed wasn't just a man. He was the architect of everything Pierce owned, and I knew exactly how to tear it all down. The Ritz-Carlton penthouse was a different world. After 2 years of smelling bleach and bad food, the scent of expensive leather and fresh lilies felt like a dream. I stood by the window watching the lights of Manhattan. Below me, people were rushing home unaware that a dead man had just come back to life. I walked into the bathroom. It was larger than my entire cell. There was marble everywhere and gold fixtures that shined like suns. I turned on the shower, letting the water get scalding hot. I stripped off my prison clothes, the cheap shirt and the faded jeans, and stepped under the spray. I scrubbed my skin until it was red. I wanted to wash away every second of the last 2 years. I wanted to wash away the memory of the handcuffs and the sound of the heavy iron doors. When I walked out in a thick white robe, I wasn't alone. Harrison Thorne was sitting at a glass table, his laptop open. Next to him sat a woman I knew, by reputation only, Diane Blackwood. In the world of New York law, they called her the Gray Wolf. She was over 60, with short silver hair and eyes that could see through any lie. She had been a top defense attorney until 5 years ago, when she was sent to prison for refusing to betray a client. She had been out for 6 months, and she looked like she was ready for a fight. Harrison introduced us. Diane didn't stand up. She just looked me up and down and told me that she liked people who didn't break. She told me that Pierce Sterling was a small man playing a big man's game, and it was time to take his toys away. We sat down to work, but we were interrupted by a knock at the door. A courier stood there with a plain manila envelope. There was no return address, no name, just a single sharp letter written in black ink on the front, N. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that handwriting. It was elegant and precise. I opened the envelope. Inside was a small black flash drive and a note on a piece of hotel stationery. It said, 2 years of work. Everything you need to bury the liars. Trust Harrison. He is the only one who knows the truth. Harrison took the drive and plugged it into his laptop. His fingers flew across the keys as he bypassed the encryption. Diane and I leaned in the blue light of the screen reflecting in our eyes. For a few minutes, the only sound in the room was the humming of the air conditioner and Harrison's typing. Suddenly, a document popped up. It was a medical record from Mercy General Hospital. I looked at the name on the top, Tiffany Sterling. "Look at the date, Artie," Diane whispered, pointing a thin finger at the screen. The date on the record was September 23rd, 11:45 p.m. It was a report from an emergency room visit. The diagnosis was a spontaneous miscarriage. The cause listed was the use of illegal high-potency diet pills that Tiffany had been taking to stay thin for the gala season. I felt the air leave my lungs. My legs went weak and I had to sit down. My son and his wife had told the whole world that I pushed Tiffany down the stairs on September 25th. They claimed I killed their baby that day. But this record proved the baby was already gone 2 days before I ever stepped foot in that office. "She lied," I whispered. My voice sounded like breaking glass. She threw herself down those stairs, knowing the baby was already dead. She used a tragedy to put me in a cage. Harrison scrolled down. There was more. Emails between Pierce and a technician who worked for Vanguard Global. Pierce had paid the man $50,000 to fix the security footage. There were bank records showing money moving from our corporate accounts into a shell company owned by Tiffany. They hadn't just framed me. They had turned my own company into a piggy bank to fund their lies. The rage that had been a small flame inside me for 2 years suddenly turned into a forest fire. I looked at Diane. She was smiling, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a wolf that had just found a wounded lamb. "This is it," Harrison said. "This is the smoking gun. We don't just get your money back, Artie. We get justice. We can send them both to the same cells you just left." I looked back out at the city. Somewhere out there, Pierce and Tiffany were probably celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was finished. They had no idea that a girl named N had been watching them, recording every sin and waiting for the right moment to hand me the knife. "Execute the freeze," I told Harrison. My voice was cold and steady. "I want Pierce to go to bed tonight thinking he's a king, and I want him to wake up tomorrow realizing he doesn't own the shoes on his feet. Cut him off from everything. Every account, every credit card, every car. I want him to feel what it's like to have nothing." Diane stood up and straightened her jacket. "The war has started, Artie, and I think we're going to enjoy watching them burn." I looked at the letter N on the envelope one last time. I knew who it was. I knew my daughter Nora was playing a dangerous game. She had stayed close to Pierce, pretending to be on his side, just so she could gather the dirt we needed. She had sacrificed 2 years of her relationship with me to save me. Now it was my turn to protect her, and my turn to destroy the son who thought he was smarter than his father. The silence in the private study of the Ritz-Carlton was heavy, the kind of silence that feels like a weight on your chest. I sat behind the large mahogany desk, my hands folded. I was waiting for the only person left in this world who shared my blood, other than the son who had stabbed me in the back. The door opened, and Nora Sterling stepped inside. She was 29 years old, wearing a navy blue pantsuit that fit her perfectly. Her hair was pulled back into a tight professional bun. She looked every bit the powerful executive I had raised her to be. But as she walked toward me, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor, there was no smile, no hug, not even a welcome home, Dad. She sat down across from me and placed a thin leather portfolio on the desk. Her face was a mask of cold indifference. I looked at her, searching for the little girl who used to sit on my lap and ask for stories about the stars. I looked into her eyes, those deep emerald green eyes that were identical to my late wife, Elizabeth. For a second, it felt like Elizabeth was sitting there looking at me. But Elizabeth's eyes were always full of light and warmth. Nora's eyes were flat and empty like a frozen lake. "Father," she said. Her voice was clinical, like she was reading a weather report. "I'm glad to see you're settled in. But we need to talk about the future of Vanguard Global." I didn't say a word. I just watched her. "Pierce is the CEO now," she continued, her voice never wavering. "The company is struggling because of the legal battles and the freezing of your personal trust. The board is nervous. The investors are pulling out. For the sake of the family name and to keep the peace, you need to sign these." She pushed the portfolio toward me. I opened it. It was a full transfer of my remaining shares and my private real estate holdings to Pierce. If I signed this, I would truly have nothing. I would be a ghost in my own empire. "To keep the peace?" I asked. My voice was raspy, still rough from the years of silence in prison. "You want me to reward the man who put me in a cage? You want me to give everything I built to the person who told the world I killed a child? Nora looked away, staring at a painting on the wall. "It's not about who is right or wrong anymore, Dad. It's about survival. Pierce is in control. If you fight him, you'll only destroy what's left of our legacy. Mom wouldn't have wanted this war. She would have wanted us to stay together." Hearing her use Elizabeth's name felt like a slap in the face. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. I was looking for something, a flinch, a tear, a tiny crack in that frozen mask. I wanted to see the daughter who used to cry when I got a paper cut. I wanted to know if there was any love left in her heart, or if Pierce had poisoned her too. "Even you, Nora," I whispered. "I thought you were the one who saw the truth. I thought you knew me better than anyone." Nora stood up abruptly. She didn't answer my question. "The world has changed in 2 years, Father. You're living in the past. If you don't sign those papers by tomorrow morning, Pierce will move forward with the permanent competency hearing. He will have you declared legally unfit to manage your life. Don't make this harder than it has to be." She turned and walked toward the door. She didn't look back. She didn't offer a hand. She just left me there in the shadows of that expensive room. I sat in the dark for a long time after she left. My heart was breaking all over again. It's one thing to be betrayed by a son you knew was ambitious and greedy. It's another thing to be abandoned by the daughter who was your pride and joy. I felt a cold loneliness settle over me. Who is really on my side? I wondered. I looked at the manila envelope marked with the letter N that Harrison had shown me earlier. The evidence on that flash drive was powerful. It was the key to my freedom and my revenge. But Nora had just stood in front of me and asked me to surrender. She had acted like she hated me. Was the envelope a trick? Was she playing both sides, or was my own daughter so far gone that she was helping Pierce finish the job? I remembered the note in the envelope. 2 years of work. Everything you need. Trust Harrison. If Nora was the one who sent it, why was she acting like a stranger now? Then it hit me. The cameras, the bugs. Pierce probably had this entire penthouse wired. He was likely watching us right now, listening to every word. If Nora showed me any love, if she showed me any support, Pierce would know. He would crush her just like he tried to crush me. She wasn't being cold because she hated me. She was being cold because she was protecting the secret. She was playing a part in a play where the stakes were life and death. She had to make Pierce believe she was on his team so she could stay close enough to hold the knife. I looked back at the door where she had disappeared. A small, sad smile touched my lips. She had Elizabeth's eyes, but she had my iron will. She was standing in the line of fire pretending to be the enemy, just to save her father. But a shadow of doubt still lingered in the back of my mind. In the world of high-stakes business, people change. Money changes people. I had to be sure. I couldn't afford to be wrong again. I had to put Nora to one final test before I let her into my inner circle. I picked up the phone and called Harrison Thorne. "Harrison," I said, "the meeting with Nora is over. She wants me to sign. We're moving to the next phase. I want to see how far my daughter is willing to go to keep the peace." The war was no longer just about money or a company. It was about the soul of my family. I was going to find out who was a Sterling and who was just a snake in a suit. I am Artie Sterling, and I was about to teach my children the most important lesson of their lives. You never bet against the man who built the house. The city that never sleeps looked like a grid of glowing embers from Harrison Thorne's office on the 50th floor. The room was minimalist, filled with glass and cold steel, reflecting the serious business we were about to finish. Outside, the New York wind howled, but inside the only sound was the soft clicking of Harrison's keyboard. Diane Blackwood sat in a leather chair, her sharp eyes fixed on the large monitor on the wall. We were diving deep into the flash drive from the envelope marked N. As the files opened one by one, the truth began to pour out like a flood. Harrison pulled up a folder titled The Glitch. Inside were bank transfers from Pierce's private account to a man named Marcus Vane, the head of security at Vanguard Global. The payments were made exactly 3 days before my arrest. There was even a recorded phone call. In the recording, Pierce's voice sounded cold and oily. He told Marcus to make sure the hallway cameras blinked for 10 minutes. My heart pounded in my chest. This was the proof I had prayed for. But there was more. The next file showed private messages between Pierce and Judge Miller, the man who had sentenced me to 2 years in prison. Pierce had promised the judge a seat on the board of a shell company once I was out of the way. It was a sickening trade, my freedom for a bribe. "They didn't just frame you, Artie," Diane said, her voice like low thunder. "They bought the law and sold your life." As Harrison scrolled through the data, I saw how organized it was. Every email, every receipt, and every secret meeting was dated and labeled. It was the work of someone who had been very close to Pierce for a long time. Someone who watched his every move while he thought they were on his side. Then I saw a folder at the very bottom of the drive. It was hidden behind 3 layers of passwords. When Harrison finally cracked it, a photo appeared on the screen. It was a picture of a handwritten diary entry. I recognized the neat, elegant script immediately. It was Nora's handwriting. The entry was dated the night of my sentencing. It said, "I watched them take Dad away today. I wanted to scream, but I had to stay quiet. If Pierce thinks I hate Dad, he will let me in. I will become his shadow. I will record every lie until I can bring him down. Forgive me, Dad, for the things I have to say to your face. I am doing this to bring you home." I felt a lump in my throat so big I could hardly breathe. My daughter hadn't abandoned me. She hadn't turned into a cold-hearted stranger. She had spent 730 days living in the house of the person who destroyed her father, pretending to be his ally, just to save me. When she stood in that room at the Ritz earlier and treated me like a stranger, she was still playing the part. She was protecting us both from Pierce's bugs and cameras. "She's a sterling," I whispered, a single tear escaping my eye. "She's been fighting this war alone for 2 years. Diane stood up and walked to the wall monitor. She began tapping on the names of the people in the files. "We have our targets, Artie. It's time to define the line between our friends and our enemies." She drew a circle around Pierce and Tiffany. "The mastermind and the parasite," she said. Then she pointed to Marcus Vane, the security tech, and Judge Miller. "The traitors who sold the truth." Finally, she looked at me. "And then there is Nora, your silent partner. She has given us the sword. Now we just have to decide when to strike." I stood up, feeling a strength I hadn't felt since before the trial. The pain of the betrayal was still there, but the realization of Nora's loyalty had turned my rage into something precise and deadly. "We strike fast," I said. "Harrison, I want the forensic audit to hit every account Pierce touched. Diane, I want the bribery evidence sent to the federal prosecutor. I want them to feel the floor disappearing beneath them before they even know they're falling." We spent the rest of the night mapping out the purge. We identified every board member who had sided with Pierce and every manager who had helped him steal from the company. By the time the sun began to rise over the Atlantic, we had a list of names that would soon be out of a job and possibly in a prison cell. "I want Pierce to have his last supper tomorrow," I told them. "Let him go to that big investor meeting. Let him think he's about to close the deal of a lifetime. And then I want to walk in and show him what happens when you try to steal a king's crown." Harrison nodded, his fingers already back on the keys. "The banks will receive the court order within the hour," he said. "By tomorrow morning, Pierce Sterling won't be able to buy a cup of coffee." I looked out at the city as the first light of dawn touched the skyscrapers. The war was no longer in the shadows. It was out in the open. I am Artie Sterling, and I was about to show my son that you can steal a man's house and his money. But you can never steal his spirit, not when he has a daughter like Nora standing in the dark, holding the light. The following evening, while I sat in the quiet shadows of my penthouse, my son was busy celebrating a victory he hadn't yet won. Thanks to the digital trail Nora left for me, I could see exactly where they were, the Sterling Grill in the Upper East Side. It was the kind of place where the air smells of expensive cigars and the deals are as thick as the $80 steaks. Pierce sat at the center table, the power seat, making sure everyone saw him. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than most people make in 3 months. Across from him sat Richard and Patricia Miller, owners of a massive construction firm. Pierce needed their $15 million investment to cover the holes he dug in Vanguard Global's accounts. Tiffany sat beside him, draped in burgundy silk and wearing diamonds that I had bought for my wife Elizabeth. She was laughing, her head tilted back, her hand resting on Pierce's arm, as if they were the king and queen of New York. "To the future," Pierce said, raising a glass of wine that cost $400 a bottle. "To a Vanguard Global that isn't stuck in the past." Richard Miller nodded, but he looked cautious. "Your father built a legendary empire, Pierce. How is Artie doing after his release?" Pierce didn't even flinch. He let out a small, mocking laugh. "My father was a dinosaur, Richard. He built the foundation, sure, but the world moved on while he was away." He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a whisper that was still loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "To be honest, the 2 years in prison broke him. He's confused. He's lashing out. He's an old man who has lost his grip on reality. We're providing him with care, of course, but he's no longer fit for the boardroom." Tiffany wiped a fake tear from her eye. "It's truly heartbreaking," she sobbed softly. "We tried to welcome him home yesterday, but he didn't even recognize us. He's just a shell of the man he used to be." It was a perfect performance. They were selling the lie that I was senile so they could keep my chair warm and my pockets empty. They were parasites, feeding on the reputation I had spent 40 years building, all while laughing at my broken mind. Pierce waved the waiter over with an arrogant snap of his fingers. When the bill came, a staggering $850 for a single dinner, he didn't even look at the total. He pulled out the Vanguard Global corporate black card and handed it over with a smirk. "Keep the change," he said loudly, making sure the Millers saw how little he cared about money. I watched the surveillance footage from Nora's phone, my heart turning to ice. I wasn't angry anymore. I was disgusted. I had raised a boy who thought that wealth gave him the right to be cruel. He thought he had outsmarted me because I was old. He thought the gray hair on my head meant the brain beneath it was rotting. But as the waiter walked away with that black card, I checked the clock on my phone. It was exactly 9:00 p.m. "Harrison," I said into my speakerphone, "drop the hammer." Back at the restaurant, Pierce was still bragging. "Once the audit is finalized, we're going to pivot the company toward digital assets. My father never understood the new world. He was a man of bricks and mortar. I am a man of the future." Suddenly, the waiter returned. He wasn't smiling. He leaned down and whispered something to Pierce. Pierce frowned. "What do you mean? Try it again. It's a black card with a $5 million limit." The waiter tried again. Beep. The sound of a declined card is a small thing, but in a room full of New York's elite, it sounds like a thunderclap. Pierce's face began to turn a deep, ugly red. "There must be a glitch in your system," Pierce hissed, his voice losing its smooth charm. Tiffany, use yours. Tiffany fumbled through her gold-plated purse and handed over her card. Beep. Declined. The silence at the table was heavy. Richard and Patricia Miller exchanged a look, the kind of look investors give when they realize they're about to get onto a sinking ship. Pierce stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "I'll call the bank. This is ridiculous." He walked toward the lobby, his hands shaking as he dialed our CFO, Gerald Thompson. I could almost feel his panic through the screen. He was about to find out that the senile old man had just turned off his life support. I leaned back in my chair at the Ritz, taking a slow sip of water. The parasites had finished their dinner. Now they were about to find out that the bill was much higher than $800. It was going to cost them everything. The night air in New York felt electric, but inside my suite, it was as cold as a mountain peak. Harrison Thorne sat at a desk filled with glowing monitors, and his fingers moved so fast over the keys that they sounded like rain on a tin roof. We weren't using guns or knives for this war. We were using numbers codes and the truth. It was 9:00 p.m., and the digital sweep was about to begin. Harrison looked at me and asked if I was ready to pull the plug. I didn't hesitate. I told him to do it. With one final click, he sent the emergency court order to the First National Bank of New York. This wasn't just a request, it was a legal bomb. Because Pierce had based his entire authority on a power of attorney that I had now officially revoked his legal right to touch my money, had vanished. The computer screen showed a list of accounts turning from green to red. Vanguard Global's corporate accounts, Pierce's personal funds, and Tiffany's shopping accounts were all locked tight. The bank system flagged every single one of them for a forensic audit because of the irregularities we had discovered. Across town at the restaurant, Pierce was staring at his phone in horror. His CFO, Gerald Thompson, was on the line, his voice sounding like he was drowning. Gerald told Pierce that the bank had just called to report massive irregularities. He told Pierce that every single company card was now a piece of useless plastic. Pierce's world was tilting. He shouted into the phone asking who gave the authority, and Gerald whispered the name that Pierce thought was dead Artie Sterling. Pierce's face went from pale to a ghostly white. He turned to look at the large TV screen above the bar in the restaurant. Every other guest in the Sterling Grill was also looking up. The CNBC logo flashed on the screen with a special breaking news bulletin. The caption at the bottom of the screen read, "Artie Sterling announces return to Vanguard Global." There I was, filling the screen. I wasn't wearing the wrinkled prison shirt anymore. I was wearing a charcoal suit that fit me perfectly, and my hair was neatly styled. I looked healthy, strong, and very, very angry. I stood at a podium with the Vanguard Global logo behind me, and I looked directly into the camera lens as if I were looking straight into my son's soul. I told the reporters and the millions of people watching that as the rightful owner and chairman. I was announcing a complete management restructuring effective immediately. My voice rang out clear and steady. I explained that while I was wrongfully imprisoned, massive financial problems had occurred. I spoke about funds being diverted to shell companies and projects being mismanaged. I promised the world that this company would be cleaned from top to bottom and that legal action would be taken against every single person responsible for this betrayal. In the restaurant, the silence was so thick you could hear a pin drop. The Millers, the investors, Pierce was trying to trick, stood up from the table without saying a word. They looked at Pierce with pure disgust and walked out of the restaurant. The waiter appeared again, standing over Pierce with the unpaid bill for $800. Pierce looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapped door, and the rope had just been cut. Tiffany grabbed Pierce's arm, her face twisting with fear. She hissed at him, asking what was happening and why people were staring. But Pierce couldn't answer. He watched his own reflection in the brass fixtures of the restaurant and saw a man who had nothing left. His phone buzzed in his hand with a text message from an unknown number. It was from Nora, though he didn't know it yet. It simply said, "The truth always surfaces." Back in the penthouse, I turned off the television. The first strike was a success. We had cut off their money and their reputation in one single blow. But I wasn't finished. Taking away their money was just the beginning. I wanted to take back the roof over their heads. I wanted them to feel the cold wind of the New York streets. I turned to Harrison and Diane. I told them to get the police and the court officials ready for tomorrow afternoon. We were going to the mansion in the Hamptons. It was time to show Pierce and Tiffany that they were no longer guests in my world. They were trespassers, and I was coming to collect my keys. I am Artie Sterling, and the war was no longer digital. It was about to become very personal. The tall iron gates of my Hamptons mansion swung open at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This house was my sanctuary, a place of cedar wood and ocean breezes that I had built for Elizabeth. For 2 years, it had been occupied by a nest of snakes. I stepped out of the black Bentley flanked by 2 police officers and a court official holding a stack of legal papers. Behind us, a large moving truck idled its engine, humming like a hungry beast. Pierce appeared at the front door a moment later. He looked terrible. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot from a sleepless night, and he was barefoot. He looked like a man who was drowning and didn't know which way was up. He started shouting, asking what the hell was going on. The court official stepped forward and began to read from a document. He cited property deed 4729, which was registered under my name, Arthur Sterling, as a sole premarital asset. Because of the financial fraud and the revocation of the power of attorney, an immediate eviction had been granted. Pierce's mouth fell open. He stammered that he was my son and that this was his home. My voice cut through the air like a frozen blade. I told him it was my house. I told him he had been a guest who overstayed his welcome and started stealing from the host. Tiffany rushed out onto the porch, then still wrapped in a silk bathrobe, her expensive hair looking limp and messy. She started screaming that we couldn't do this to her. I looked at her with pure disgust. I told her she was no lady. I called her a parasite who had simply attached herself to the wrong host. I gave the signal to the police officers. I told them to allow Pierce and Tiffany to take their personal belongings, only just their clothes and basic toiletries. Everything else in that house, from the artwork on the walls to the wine in the cellar, had been bought with company funds or my personal wealth. Tiffany began to scream about her designer bags and her dresses, but I cut her off. I told her those were paid for with stolen money. Just then, a black BMW pulled up to the driveway. Nora Sterling stepped out wearing a sharp navy pantsuit and sunglasses that hid her eyes. Pierce's face lit up with a sudden, desperate hope. He called out to her, thanking God she was there and telling her to stop this insanity. He thought his sister was his last lifeline. Nora walked up the driveway, the sound of her heels clicking on the stone like a ticking clock. She walked right past Pierce without even looking at him, as if he were nothing more than a piece of old furniture left out in the rain. She walked straight to me and stood by my side. Pierce froze. His voice was shaky as he begged her to call me off. Nora slowly took off her sunglasses and looked at him. The mask she had been wearing for 2 years was finally gone. Her eyes weren't cold anymore. They were filled with a fierce, righteous anger. She told him that he had made his choices. She told him he had chosen Tiffany over me, and he had chosen lies over his own family. Then came the moment that truly broke him. Nora looked at the police officers and then back at Pierce. She told him that she couldn't help someone who had betrayed their own father. She revealed that she had been the one documenting his every move, every fake invoice, and every lie for 730 days. She told him she had played the role of his loyal sister just so she could gather the evidence to bury him. Pierce staggered back as if he had been punched in the stomach. He looked at Nora and whispered that she had betrayed him. Nora slammed her hand against the legal portfolio she was carrying. She shouted that she had saved our father. She told him he was the one who had sent an innocent man to prison and lived in his house while he suffered. The next 30 minutes were the most satisfying moments of my life. I watched as the police escorted Pierce and Tiffany into the house to pack. They came back out a short time later, carrying only 3 suitcases and 2 duffel bags. That was all they had left of their stolen life. They stood outside the large iron gates as they clicked shut with a loud electronic finality. Across the street, the neighbors, the same people Pierce had tried to impress for years, were standing on their lawns, filming the whole thing on their phones. By that night, the image of Pierce Sterling standing on the sidewalk with a duffel bag would be on every news station in New York. Pierce looked through the bars of the gate one last time. He looked like a small lost boy, but I didn't feel any pity for him. He had had everything, and he had thrown it away because he was too greedy to wait his turn. Nora put her arm around me. The weight that had been on my shoulders for 2 years finally started to lift. We walked back toward the house together, leaving the traitors behind us in the dirt. My home was mine again, and my daughter was finally home too. I am Artie Sterling, and I had just shown my son that the gates of my world don't just keep people out, they lock the right people in. The boardroom on the 50th floor of Vanguard Plaza was silent. It was the kind of silence you feel right before a storm hits. I sat at the head of the long marble table. 8 board members sat around me, their faces pale and nervous. Behind me, Harrison Thorne stood with his laptop ready. We had called this emergency meeting for 9 a.m. sharp. I pressed a button on the desk. The massive wall screen showed a red line crashing down. I explained that under Pierce's leadership, our profits had fallen 40%, while our debt had doubled. Harrison clicked his mouse and showed money flowing to a company called Lux Consulting. I asked the room who would pay $1.5 million for interior design. Harrison gave the answer. Tiffany Sterling owned that company. She started it just 3 days after I was sent to prison. Suddenly, the heavy double doors burst open. Pierce stumbled into the room. He looked like a mess. His eyes were wild and his hair was uncombed. He shouted that he was still the legal CEO and that this meeting was a joke. I did not even turn my head to look at him. I told him he was nothing but a thief. Pierce laughed, but it was a desperate sound. He told the board that I only held 70% of the shares and that I needed a bigger majority to kick him out. He thought he still had a chance to fight. I looked at the door and told Harrison to invite our final board member. The doors opened again, and Nora Sterling walked in. She was wearing a white suit, looking like an angel of justice. Pierce's face changed from anger to relief. He called out to her, begging her to tell everyone this was crazy. Nora walked right past him, as if he were invisible. She took her seat at the table. I announced to the room that Nora held the other 30% of the shares which she had inherited from her mother's private trust. Pierce gasped. He thought those shares were gone. Nora spoke up, her voice as cold as ice. She told the room that our mother had left those shares to her and me, with a special instruction. Pierce would only inherit anything if he proved he was an honest leader. Nora pulled out a thick file. She told the board she had spent 2 years documenting every crime Pierce committed. Every fake invoice, every bribe to Judge Miller, and the payment to the camera technician was in that file. Pierce grabbed a chair to keep from falling over. He realized that Nora had been the N in the envelope. She had been the spy in his own house. Nora stood up and slammed her hand on the table. She shouted that Pierce had sent an innocent man to prison just for money. She said he had destroyed our family's reputation for greed. Then she cast her vote. She voted yes to remove Pierce as CEO, and yes to push for criminal charges. I followed her, making it a 100% vote. Every other board member raised their hand immediately. It was unanimous. I looked at the security guard standing by the door. "Take him out," I said quietly. 2 police officers stepped into the room. They did not just ask Pierce to leave. They pulled his arms behind his back and clicked the metal handcuffs shut. The sound echoed through the silent room. Pierce started to cry. He begged Nora and me for mercy. He looked at the board members, the same people he had tried to impress with his expensive suits and lies. But they all turned their heads away in shame. Nora turned her chair toward the window, refusing to look at the brother she once loved. I sat still, watching as the officers dragged him toward the door. Pierce's last view of the company was me sitting at the head of the table, reclaiming my empire. The door closed and the lock clicked. Pierce Sterling was gone. He had lost the company, his family, and his freedom. He had tried to be a king, but he ended up a criminal in handcuffs. 3 months after the courtroom collapsed and justice was finally served, the world felt quiet again. Pierce was sentenced to 15 years in a state penitentiary for his crimes. Tiffany received 12 years for her part in framing me. I sat in the front row that day, my spine straight, watching as the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs. Pierce turned back once, his eyes finding mine, but my gaze was like ice. 1 year later, I found myself sitting in a small, cold room at the state prison. I was there to see Pierce one last time. When he walked in, I hardly recognized him. His face was gaunt, and his prison uniform was faded and ill-fitting. He sat across from me, his hands trembling on the metal table. He whispered, "Dad, I know I don't deserve it, but..." I didn't let him finish. I slid a manila envelope across the table. His hands shook as he pulled out the document inside. His eyes scanned the words, "Transfer of Ownership, Vanguard Global." The document stated that Nora Sterling was now the 100% shareholder and chief executive officer of the company. "You're giving her everything?" Pierce asked, his voice cracking with a mix of shock and jealousy. "I already did," I said flatly. It had been her company for 6 months already. I leaned forward, looking him dead in the eyes. I told him that he was no longer my son, legally, emotionally, or financially. He had chosen greed over family, and he had chosen Tiffany over me. I stood up and told him he would serve his 15 years, and when he finally got out, he would have nothing. No name, no legacy, and no father. As I turned toward the door, Pierce's voice broke as he cried out, "Dad, I'm sorry." I paused with my back to him, and for a moment the room held its breath. Then I walked out. The heavy steel door clanged shut behind me, a sound that signaled the end of our history. Outside, the New York sun was blazing over the horizon. I walked toward my car, where Nora was leaning against the door with a small smile on her face. She asked me how it went. I told her it was done. She nodded and said, "Good." I looked at my daughter, my partner, my only true family. I asked her if she was ready to run an empire. Nora grinned and reminded me that she had been running it for 6 months already. I laughed a real deep laugh for the first time in years. As we pulled away from the prison, I looked in the side mirror and watched the gray walls grow smaller until they disappeared. The past was buried and the future belonged to us. This is my story. It is a story of betrayal and sacrifice, but also of the incredible price of loyalty. I am Artie Sterling, and I want you to learn what I learned the hard way. Family isn't just about the blood in your veins. It's about who stands by you when the world burns down. Don't let greed blind you to what truly matters. Don't betray the people who built the world you live in. I lost a son forever, not to a prison cell, but to his own selfish choices. But I gained a daughter who proved that real love requires sacrifice. She pretended to abandon me for 2 years just to save me. That is the kind of person worth fighting for. So here is my advice. Choose your family wisely. Choose character over convenience and loyalty over greed. If my story touched your heart, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story like mine. And if you believe in second chances and the power of loyalty, hit that share button. Thank you for listening to An Old Man's Truth.